What's the best example of you money you've seen? I'm an employment and contract attorney. In my younger days, I was corp counsel for a large hospital. We were in the midst of a fundraising campaign and were a few million from our goal. Got a call from a wealthy, youngish guy. Offered to cover the remainder plus 10% with two stipulations. He used to work at the hospital when he was younger and made it rich with a medical device company he started, so he wanted a voting member board seat. And he wanted to fire this vice president who was a supervisor when he worked there and had made his life miserable. Was the reason he quit and needed up business for himself. Took it to the board and CEO. They agreed to board seat. I couldn't advise they allow the firing for liability. However, the CEO decided to reorganize certain departments, and coincidentally, this VPS position was eliminated. The new board member chaired the committee that made the call on the reorganization and informed the VP of the changes. That was the biggest duck you long-term grudge I ever saw. Story 2. Billionaire Howard Hughes reserved the top 2 floors of the Desert Inn in Las Vegas for 10 days. When his 10 days were up, the hotel asked him to check out. He wasn't ready to leave, so he bought the hotel and stayed there for 4 years. Comment. My favorite thing he did was buying a local television station so he could call them up at night and tell them to play whatever movie he felt like watching, like it was his own private Netflix decades before streaming existed. He made them play Ice Station Zebra over 100 times. Story 3. Notoriously, Mark Cuban literally getting fined for saying duck on a broadcast, finding out the fine goes to charity and saying it again. Comment. He's also one of the few billionaires who doesn't prescribe at all to them being some 200 IQ genius or something. Someone asked him once that if he lost everything, could he become a billionaire again? His response would basically, I'd like to think I could become a millionaire, but there's a lot of luck involved with becoming a billionaire. It's nice to hear a guy acknowledge there's luck involved with the whole thing. Story 4. Ferruccio Lamborghini. Back in the days, he got rich building tractors, and he bought himself a Ferrari because he's Italian, and it was the thing to do when you became successful. Unfortunately, sports car clutches back then were crap and failed often. He went to Ferrari himself and said he could fix the problem and was told to go back to his tractors because he knew nothing about high-performance cars. The wiki says he made cars to compete with Ferrari and the others, but in reality, he did it to spite Ferrari, starting a car factory to spite someone. Epic level of duck you. Comment. Somewhat related, there's also the development of the Ford GT. At one point, Ford was in talks to buy Ferrari, but Ferrari had no intention of selling to Ford, instead using the talks with Ford to drive up the price when he sold to Fiat, but the deal ensured that Enzo Ferrari would maintain control of Ferrari's racing division. Out of pure spite, Ford spent an absurd amount of money to develop the Ford GT40 to end Ferrari's winning streak at the 24-hour Le Mans. Basically, a lot of development in motorsport and sports cars has been done purely to give Enzo Ferrari the middle finger. Story 5. The CEO of my company is actually a super solid guy. He hates one of our competitors so much he bought a billboard right outside the competitor's office and kept our ad up until they changed locations. Comment. An oil company I used to work for fired their founder and CEO. He started a new oil company around the corner and put up a billboard on every corner around his former company's campus. Story 6. This is more of a you should reconsider rather than a proper duck you. Growing up, our neighbor was incredibly wealthy, probably in the low 9 figures, owned a tremendous amount of land, and could probably influence the price of beef with the amount of cattle he had. And oil, of course. He was in his 80s. Health was deteriorating, so his kids showed up while he was recovering from surgery and explained to him they didn't want him driving anymore and took his truck. Soon as they left, he called a local dealership and had a brand new truck dropped off an hour later. Kids came back over the next day, and he just told them he decided he wanted to keep driving and was fine buying another new truck every day if he had to. Story 7. I worked at a high-end eco-resort some time ago. We spent weeks preparing for some guests who'd booked up half the resort for him and his family, doing a bunch of renovations and changes in the cabins and rooms because the guy was very picky, but he was spending a lot, so whatever. We even rebuilt the motor on another boat and outfitted it for downrigging because they needed 3 fishing boats. The guy shows up for his reservation, and first thing he does is start cussing out and belittling the girl at the front desk. The owner walked in to see what his problem was, and the guy proceeded to crap on the front desk girl to him. So the owner just said, I'm terribly sorry you feel that way. We will give you a full return on your deposit so you can find somewhere better to stay. The guy's face goes white, and he starts apologizing and pleading with him, but the owner didn't care. The guy had to go out to the parking lot and explain to his entire family how his garbage temper ducked up their 1-week vacation, and they'd have to find somewhere else to stay. The owner couldn't give a duck how much extra money he had spent. He wasn't taking that crap. And more importantly, he wasn't going to make the staff take that shift. He wasn't my favorite boss, but that is something I respect. Story 8. Not Bezos money or anything, but my grandmother sold her condo and bought a house down the street because the condo association wouldn't let her paint her mailbox the color she wanted. Story 9. My uncle bought a $900K small shop back in 2012. cash just so it wasn't torn down because he liked to go there as a kid. Literally just an abandoned small store in downtown Evansville. I have no clue what the store is. All I know is it's by the casino. It was bought at the end of 2012. I don't even know if he owns it still, could have flipped it or demo it down. He runs multiple businesses in Evansville, Indianapolis, Louisville, Frankfurt, and Nashville. Story 10. This story's lore grows with every retelling, but it's one of my favorites from growing up. There was a restaurant outside my small town. A billionaire was eating there without showing his status whatsoever at all. He asked for fries on the side of his meal instead of mashed potatoes. The waitress made a big deal about how the place didn't do substitutions. He politely pointed out that they had French fries on their menu, so he wasn't sure what the issue was. She reiterated that mashed potatoes was the assigned side for his meal and they wouldn't switch it. He escalated to a manager who said fries were no problem. That probably would have been the end of it. But the waitress wouldn't let it go, haranguing him throughout the meal, doing the thing where you talk loudly about someone within earshot of them, really talking to them, just generally being obnoxious for no reason, making a big deal of nothing. So he quietly bought the restaurant for twice what it was worth, allowing the owners to retire early and fired this woman. Comment, that sounds like someone content to peacefully live his life and not throw his weight around, but if he ever does, then you know you've ducked up. Story 11. A former boss of mine was going through a contentious divorce. Her husband had skipped town down to Florida with some skank, ditching my boss and their son. Eventually, when the divorce was being finalized, it came to the point where they had to divide assets. She was the primary breadwinner, and the judge ruled that she had to either give him one of her vehicles, she had several large trucks, or buy him a new one. Her husband was no small fry. He stood 6'7", and was a former bodybuilder. So, rather than give her one of her many trucks, she bought him a completely brand new Toyota Prius. This huge man looked like he was driving a clown car around town, and it was hilarious. Story 12. Not a case of genuine duck you money, but a lesser situation that sticks out in my mind. So this happened to a close friend quite some time ago. He and his wife were looking for a decent home in a particular area, something to grow into and raise a family. Didn't ever find what they were looking for, so they bought a nice-sized parcel of rural land after doing a ducking crap ton of homework and built a home on it. They were self-made. They paid cash for it all, owned it lock, stock, and barrel. They built it up over the years, so it wasn't all at once. They also were a bit eclectic and liked to work on different art projects. Eventually had a couple of workshop garages, liked to paint the place, different contrasting colors, had a garden out front, etc. Not ugly, but it wouldn't be considered normal. It was pretty out of the way at the time, so no real big deal. Practically no neighbors, very minimal zoning permit laws. That's one of the reasons they chose that land plot in the first place. Fast forward 25-odd-some years, the entire area is becoming developed. Their kids are grown up and moved out. A massive housing development now circles their property like a big old lopsided U-shape, nearly surrounding it, and they started to get harassed by the development owners, as well as their HOA representatives, plus lawyers. They said crap like, "You're dragging down the value of our development. Not our problem if you made a bad investment. Notices are delivered which state, your property doesn't conform to HOA guidelines. We're not part of your HOA, please leave us alone. And we'll buy your place out. No, we're not selling." They were half considering it since the kids left, but now they just want to stay on principle. They kept dialing up their legally entitled shenanigans. "You need to join the HOA. No. Duck you and suck a pineapple. Bother us again and we'll call the cops on you." They get approached by the HOA lawyers via official-looking letters saying essentially, "In this jurisdiction, we can compel your bank, who holds mortgage to the property, to force you to join the HOA and abide by their guidelines. It's the same laws that compel homeowners to carry homeowners insurance for the duration of the mortgage." Earlier, I said state, but I'm unsure if it really is a statewide thing as it was told to me. So I'm going with a more neutral and ambiguous jurisdiction. And they did their research. And apparently in many places, you might have bought the property without an HOA, but they can compel you to join one if ever offered. Since HOAs increase property prices, and that protects the bank's investment. My friend is like, "Go ahead, compel away, bitches." Remember, they bought the place in cash all those years ago. Zero mortgage. The development and HOA couldn't do a damn thing. Best use of duck you money I've seen. Last I spoke with them, they were hiring a lawyer to ensure that if the property changes hands, a no HOA exclusion is put into the deed. That way their kids can inherit it or sell it without any HOA nonsense. Comment. I read a similar one, and after all the harassment, the HOA built the entry to the subdivision across the guy's property and figured they'd get away with it. He gated it off. They tried to sue him over it and wound up having to pay him some insane amount of money for access because they'd built themselves into a corner, had violated a bunch of laws, and had no other option. In the end, he basically owned them and stipulated that the HOA be dissolved. Story 13. Without talking about multimillionaires and billionaires, I've seen multiple people in my career who would have worked until 65 plus and started taking no crap in either cooperate or government roles. and were getting reprimanded for various things at like 45, 55 years old. I've seen people literally verbally say to executive suite levels to duck you in a group setting and walk out, off into the sunset with no regrets. Comment. I just saw one of these guys do that. Small town government. Guy's been there since forever. He's the one who gets all the stuff done and who has all the historical knowledge. Guy's about 50, 55. Without him, the place crumbles. Bad manager, BM came in a few years ago. She was so unbearably bad, incompetent, a bully, a micromanager, and a narcissist, yes, all those things, that employees started leaving one after the other. The department turned into a ghost town. Mayor did nothing. Everybody was waiting for the mayor to fire BM. Then after quite the confrontation, guy said he's had it and hands in his resignation. Gives a 2 weeks notice. Guess what? Suddenly, BM is fired and leaves on the spot. No 2 weeks notice. Nada. Ciao. Guy decides to stay and his resignation gets canceled. Employees start coming back to the department. They get one of the old managers, pre-BM, out of retirement. All is well. Story 14. My ex worked at a very expensive, very private golf course. One day, a few members are playing poker in the lounge for $5.10 a hand. In walks this hotshot new member who asks to play. When he hears what they're playing for, he says something along the lines of, "WTF's the point of that? We're all rich. Let's play for real money." Nobody's really interested in this. They just want to play for fun, but the guy won't drop it. Finally, the oldest of the group says, "Okay, let's play. What's your net worth?" To which the younger guy smugly replies, $2 million. The older guy goes, "All right, let's play the next hand for $2 million, straight up." The younger guy gets all huffy, saying he just wanted to have fun. Why is the old guy being such a Old guy responds, "I'm worth $30 mile, but I don't need to be an ass to prove it. Now shut up and play or get the duck out." The younger guy did not want to play, apparently canceled his membership a week later. Story 15. Recently found out Jeff Bezos was sitting in his living room and randomly had the idea to find the Apollo 11 engines from the bottom of the Atlantic. He bought all the equipment, assembled a team, and went and found it, then donated them to the Smithsonian. They're on display about 30 feet from the Apollo 11 command module, Neil's lunar suit, and Eugene Cernan's boots. The last man-made thing to leave the lunar surface. Story 16. Kerry Packer playing poker in Las Vegas when a Texan approached the table and was being a nuisance. The Texan was asked to calm down and responded with, "Don't you know who I am? I'm worth $100 million, you know." Packer apparently interjected with, "I'll flip you for it." Kerry Packer was worth $4 billion on his death. His life story is a fascinating tale. Story 17. I know somebody who tried to build a giant garage in their backyard to conduct their business out of. The neighbor complained to the town planning board and managed to block construction. He bought the empty land next to the neighbor's house and donated it to Habitat for Humanity so that they'd build a house there just to piss off the neighbor. He then managed to get some tweaked plans through the planning board for his giant garage to hold his sailboat that didn't exist. Story 18. My friend's mother-in-law has a wonderful home on Cape Cod. It's not one of the huge McMansion eyesores that started showing up in nearby towns in the 1980s. It's just a very comfortable, well-designed 3-bed, 2-bath house on a hillside with lots of beautiful hand-hewn woodwork and an incredible view of the coast, just a couple streets downhill. The house was built in the mid-1950s. And while there aren't many strict legal boundaries regarding what can and cannot be built, renovated, expanded, or demolished, the folks in this community have been happily coexisting so well for the past 75-plus years that you can count the number of incidents on one hand and everyone knows who tried to do what with their house or their land. The neighbor who lived one street downhill between my pal's mill and the coast sadly passed away during the pandemic, and because his rent had moved away, the property went to market and was immediately snatched up well over asking price by some Boston-based tech bro. Within a month, he'd started demolishing the retaining walls and driveway to allow access for the general contractor he'd hired to tear down the existing house, which had been meticulously cared for and looked right at home in the neighborhood, and raise a new concrete and glass monstrosity that would have completely severed the line of sight to the coast for at least 4 houses located uphill. I wasn't aware of the means available to my buddy's mile, but after a few neighbors introduced themselves to this new arrival to the area and expressed their concerns, she cut him a check for 5% above what he paid for the house. No loans, no remortgage on her existing home, no payment plan, just bought it outright for more than I'll earn in the next 25 years, even if I'm lucky. The downhill house is now rented well below market value to a lovely family with 2 kids. Story 19. I once had a client who was a builder going through a hard time. It was 2020. The guy's client stopped paying, CR lines locked up, etc. During the hard time, a cabinet supplier stole his money. It was all the money the guy had at the time to finish a project, and he gave it to a cabinet supplier who basically took it and never delivered the product and said, "Duck off." Fast forward 2 years. Builder is doing great. Cabinet guy is not. Cabinet guy has a house he'd been working on through the pandemic, and it never got finished. City flagged it for violations and wanted it either completed or torn down. Cabinet guys spent like a year in court trying to working it out with the city. Builder backdoor goes to city and says condemn it and revoke the permits or take it by eminent domain and I'll buy it from you. And the city did. Builder bought it from the city and stripped the house clean of every item that was removable and gave it to all people who had gotten ripped off by the cabinet guy. Then he tore it down. He hired a taco truck that was owned by cabinet guy's brother to supply the demolition trades with food the day of the demo. I heard he threw the guy's kids' play set in the backyard through a wood chipper. He asked me if he would get in trouble for mailing the little piece of concrete with the guy's kids' handprints in it back to him, and I said no. He left the little block of concrete with my receptionist on his way out and said FedEx this to that piece of crap for me and put it on my bill. And that was the last we heard from him. All in all, I think he spent $900K to acquire it and tear it down. I'm a lawyer for context, helping with the deal. The guy went full tilt, but if I'm being honest, I kind of admired him for it. But spending $900K just to duck someone over that stole $50K from you is what I'd consider duck you money. Story 20. My client's discussing their tab from brunch at a champagne party in Aspen 1. That tab seemed kinda high, $36K? 2, nah. There was the cover with the first tray of 4 bottles, then we got the one for those girls, then we got 2 more for us. And 1 for the guys from Company 1. I guess that tracks plus the reserve that nobody got to drink because Mark sprayed it all over those Instagram modes 3. How the duck was? I supposed to know it was an $8,000 bottle? 2, because it said 1947 on the bottle in big letters. 3, whatever. I'll get dinner or something and we'll call it even casually implying dinner will be another $36K. Story 21. Back in 2008, the UAE paid more than $1 billion USD to bail out the city of Chicago in a deal with Morgan Stanley and Mayor Daley, in exchange for the profits of the 36,000 parking meters for the next 75 years. Story 22. Guy I used to work for thought it would be funny to hire a limo to take a friend to lunch. The restaurant was literally next door to where they were. Limo company refused to rent by the hour and said he had to hire it for the entire day. Guy was angry, so just bought a limo. After lunch, he was still angry and decided to just buy a few more and start his own limo company. A month or 2 later, he bought the company that refused him an hourly rental. Story 23. He's an asshole, but Peter Thiel bankrolling Hulk Hogan's lawsuit against Gawker, which ultimately led to their bankruptcy because he was pissed. They outed him as gay. Story 24. I used to work with companies that build super yachts. It happens several times that the interior of a vessel has been finished in $500K plus worth of marble, after which the owner walks in, decides he doesn't like the color in hindsight, and requests it all to be removed again. My brother also worked for a super yacht company in New Orleans. An owner's wife showed up to give final approval on a finished boat, only to announce the interior was the wrong shade of pink. She wanted blush, not bashful. So most of the boat had to be disassembled so that they could repaint the entire interior. Story 25. We have a disabled daughter and we're able to put her through a private preschool for free in exchange for helping speak at the good things the school did for our daughter. We were speakers at their big charity ball and got placed at a rich table where everyone ate our story up. We were pretty poor at the time and were literally putting the fancy rolls in my wife's purse. We get to the auction portion of the night and one of the ladies told us that last year she won the auction for an all-expense-paid first-class luxury safari down in Africa. But she had no one to go with her, so she donated it back to the school this year. Halfway through the bidding of the safari she donated, after paying for, she goes, "Oh, my niece, she loves animals, I could have taken her," and went and won it again. She bid $15K that night, and she said about $12K to win it the first time, and that was 20 years ago. We went home and used those rolls to spruce up our Carl Buddig crappy deli meat sandwiches for the next week. Story 26. I met a dude in Rehab who was so rich that after group, he flew the rest of us across state lines on a jet. He had just ready to go and took us skydiving and got us back home before our sober living curfew. When we landed at that other airport, the instructors already knew and had our parachutes and gear laying out ready to get everyone prepared like he just told them, "Yo, me and 10 friends gonna skydive in a few hours, be ready for us." He did this all on a whim too that day. Some of the people totally had warrants and were not supposed to travel at all, especially across state lines. So the house manager was not happy. That dude was a homie. Some of the other people totally tried to abuse his generosity, but I genuinely just liked that dude. Sad he was going through crap because he was so nice and generous with his money. I went to his giant-ass expensive Orange County mansion with him too, and he made me the best steak I've ever had in my life. Hope he's doing good. Story 27. I knew a guy who owned a machine shop factory next to an industrial complex I managed. I met him when I was on site at about 6 a.m. and he was walking through the gates. He was dressed like a homeless man and told me he used to use our gates as a shortcut to get to his factory. He would wander through and then slip through a hole in the fence to access his factory because he couldn't be bothered walking around. Anyway, got talking, and it turned out he lived in the area. which at this time was a pretty rough area, full of industrial land and some rough residential areas because his family used to own all the land around when it was farmland and had gradually sold it off, but he stayed in the family home. Short version, he was a very wealthy man. He was mad as a cut snake, but pretty canny and seriously rich. He told me the story that he had neighbors who had moved in and were parking their cars on his driveway. He asked them to stop. They didn't. He knew they were renting, so he bought the house and evicted them. Story 28. I wasn't around for the meeting, but when my great-grandma died, my great-aunts were very argumentative about the costs of the funeral. It got to the point where they were arguing about the cost of something so fierce. My uncle just pulled out a few hundreds, slammed it on the table, and said it was covered. Apparently, everybody shut up about it after that. Story 29. Post Malone spent $2.6 million to buy the One Ring, an MTG card. Watt printed a zillion copies of the same card, but there was one singular copy with different art, the text in Elvish, like a Wonka golden ticket. Story 30. In college, I got a phone call for a babysitting job. At the time, I was working for a private international school, and my aunt proudly passed my information to multiple parents. I'm told to meet with her friends and their daughter and see if we'd be a good fit for future jobs with the family. As soon as I pulled up, a huge automatic gate opened, and it's truly like Kristen Wiig in Bridesmaids driving up to the bridal shower. As I continued to drive down the driveway, I realize this is no normal family. The first thing I see is other staff everywhere. I proceed to go through 2 rounds of interviews. My first day, I'm greeted by 2 huge English Mastiffs, given the rundown on other staff, and handed the sweetest newborn. I start to dilly-dally after I put the baby down and start to look around. Photos of boxers, bankers, socialites, lawyers, pro athletes, race car drivers, and just about anyone in the Great Name Book are in multiple photos with this family. I go downstairs to the sprawling backyard and make my way into the garage for a drink. Lambo, Squagon, a Bentley, and a Mercedes Sprinter for groups with a driver who could take the baby and I anywhere. Next 2 years include random last-minute trips, including attempting to get 2 English Mastiffs on a private plane with because the dogs were only comfortable with me. This job included amazing trips, great pay, free stays all the time, amazing meals, free private concerts with extremely talented musicians and artists, chefs from Michelin star restaurants cooking for dinner parties in their home, and the best closet cleanouts. Things get dark 2 years in, and due to behavior activity, one of the parents was let go from their job. While the family is trying to piece everything back together, I questioned what my job looked like. I'm doing laundry and find a crumpled paper with my boss's full name on it. These people are heirs, and their name goes back farther than I can fully explain here, let alone type out. Needless to say, my bosses were transferred to another state and eventually country, because they could work at any office worldwide, essentially. The only thing it came down to was, what office can handle this couple, and how much do we actually need them? This was a very sticky situation considering their family owned the business in which they worked in. Basically, they had, and still do have, to keep the family around because they're the direct and final heir. So now, they bounce around and continue to make millions off of the family business they can't be fired from, and trust, they were easy to work for, but wild. I can't imagine what the company has to deal with in seeing their behavior. I just feel so bad for their crisis management person. I was able to see someone do a few lines and then rip every camera on their property down and throw them in the pool because they thought the company was listening in. But still, what would they do? Fire them? Nope. Why? Because they own the place and have duck you money, that's why. Story 31. My dad witnessed a coworker win lotto, walk straight into the boss's office, scream, "Duck you vulva," at the top of his voice, and walk out. This was over 40 years ago, and he never saw the bloke again. Story 32. So in real life, a family friend of ours, who owns a very successful national company, his wife's Jaguar, sports coupe type, was stolen out of their driveway. He noticed at about 6 a.m. when he got up for work. He called the Jaguar dealer principal, first name basis, mobile number, and had a new replacement car there by lunchtime in exactly the same color and trims. His wife apparently didn't notice until about 4 days later when the police turned up with what was left of her Jaguar. Good times. Story 33. About 20 years ago, I worked the flight line at a FBO, basically a place at the airport where private planes park and get service, etc. I worked at a more upscale FBO, so we mostly handled citations, Gulfstreams, and the like, private jets. One day, a customer who was repeatedly described to me as the Prince of Saudi Arabia came in on his personal DC-10. This thing was huge and complicated compared to most of our customers. In part because it was a special head of a state with duck, you money tricked out DC-10. Among other things visible from the exterior was a full suite of military countermeasures, missile jammers, chaff flares, and several others I couldn't identify. He was only scheduled to be there a few days. On his planned departure date, he rolls up with an entourage in Bentleys, steps out, then before boarding says, "I want to go shopping." The entourage packs up and ducks off, just like that. Days go by, then a week, then 2. Management raises their daily cost for parking considerably, charging thousands a day. But the prince doesn't care. Day in and day out, we stare at this billionaire's plane sitting there, telling each other our theories about what was inside. A month goes by. Then one day, all hands on deck, the prince wants to leave. Tonight. We have to prep a DC-10 with full amenities in just a few hours. We were scrambling, getting her fueled up, running through checks, servicing the crafters, etc. When the catering folks needed a hand, we all volunteered to help so we could get a look at the inside of the plane. I enter, and on my left is the cockpit. Behind the cockpit is an armored security room that looks like something from Crimson Tide. A bunch of screens with radar, cameras, controls for all the fancy military toys, etc. I turn right, and the walkway is a narrow corridor which walks past the prince's private room. Behind the private room was a lounge with a coffee bar, couches, lots of artwork and gold trim. Further back was a more traditional airline cabin with business class size seats for about 40 staffers. I'll never forget what I saw when I looked into the prince's private room. It was like something out of a Judd Apatow movie, like it was a parody of itself. In the center was a king-size bed covered with satin sheets and a tiger fur blanket. The ceiling above the bed was, I crap you not, a mirror. The room was dimly lit in warm red and orange tones with opulent plush furniture and expensive-looking decorations. To cap it all off was a portrait of the prince in a military uniform hanging directly over the bed. So yeah, there are private jets and then duck you money jets. Story 34, my oldest brother. He's the best big brother I could ever ask for even before he made it big. His only job in his life has been working for Kroger starting when he was 16. He's some big wig now in Cincinnati at the corporate shop, and gave me a bottle of whiskey worth over 20 grand because he couldn't find a place for it in his bar cabinet in his vacation house in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Story 35. I had a boss who would take the whole team out to dinner, order every appetizer and dessert on the menu for everyone, and expect us to order an entree on top of that. She gave my supervisor her black card for drinks for the team, including the interns, and told her to return it on Monday. I want to be that rich and awesome someday. Story 36. Here in the States, I was at a FedEx store, and the family ahead of me had a rather large box, like a solid 36x36x36. I heard them say with a British accent the address it was to be sent to in the UK. Seems normal so far, right? Cashier asked when he wanted it to arrive. Note, this was at about noon. He said, tomorrow, with a straight face. The cashier sort of laughed and said something like, sir, that's going to be about $1,200. Customer simply said, that's fine, and handed over his black Amex. My jaw hit the floor. For the couple replies saying, this isn't that odd, it was a stereo setup for his brother's birthday. Yes, that's pretty baller. Story 37. All I can say is go to a poor country if you want to feel like you have duck you money, but you're just sort of middle class in the US. I went traveling with my wife back to her home country and paid for everything for 4 adults for 4 days and didn't even both looking at the bills I was signing at one point. I don't think I even spent $1,000 for what felt like unlimited fun for that time. Story 38. My dad used to do handyman work for a fairly rich guy. He had a house in the hills with quite a few acres. Someone bought one of the hills next to him and started building a house. He didn't like how it looked, so he bought it from them and halted construction and had all traces of construction removed. Then he didn't like how much land was surrounding him with no fence. His property line was now too far to see. So he just had a fence put in, across the middle of his land, so he could see a fence. Story 39. We built a mansion for a guy who would write a $25,000 check to code enforcement and tell them to come back when the money ran out. Because all us subcontractors had nowhere to store equipment or materials, but the city street and sidewalks. Story 40. Guy I know is the black sheep of the family. His older brother is the golden child who was sent to private school. The mom drove him every day to from school. He got his full tuition paid for university and masters. The parents bought him a condo in the city as a graduation present. He had his wedding in Japan. The parents bought the diamond ring for his wife. He was set up well. The black sheep went to public school, walked every day, was left on the doorstep waiting for the family to come home, even during snowstorms. Went to university, but only got a dinner as a graduation present. He worked hard doing odd jobs, like being a bike messenger and restaurant cook. After the dad died, the black sheep supported the mom. He made a success of himself through hard work, was accepted to a prestigious university for a master's degree, but didn't have the money. He asked his mom for help and promised to pay her back with interest, but she said no, so he never went. Now he works as an international consultant and makes good money, well into 6 figures. And he helps his brother's 2 kids through university by paying part of their annual tuition. The mom has no financial discipline and bills are stacking up. He also paid a lot of her medical bills. One day she was robbed while she was at an ATM and lost a lot of cash in her cards. She asked Black Sheep for financial help, so the tables were turned. Very recently, he realized he was the neglected child in a home of narcissists, conditioned to be a people pleaser, and that his needs came second or were ignored. So when she asked for money again, he didn't say no, like she had. He just deposited some cash into her account and never spoke to her again. Now she asks everyone where he is and why he never calls, writes to her. She can only catch glimpses of him on social media living his best life, traveling the world, living on his own terms, paying for everything himself, carries no debt, has fun in exotic places, and feels zero guilt. Success is the best revenge. Story 41. A friend of my mom's wanted to open a restaurant on a specific corner. I think it was a place he used to eat as a kid. Well, a liquor store had opened on that corner after an old restaurant shut down. He offered to buy the liquor store owner out to use that property, but the liquor store owner said duck off. So he built a liquor store literally double the size right across the street, walked in, handed the guys the keys, and said, "Get the duck out." Then he opened his restaurant where he wanted. Story 42. When I was 15, I was riding with my good friend and his incredibly wealthy family to a theme park when his car, a Mercedes with all the upgrades, started making a weird noise. He pulled into a gas station and the car wouldn't start. His eldest son came and picked us up, and I didn't think anything out of the ordinary. Later that day, I found out that he left the car in the parking lot and went and bought a brand new one. Story 43. This isn't the answer you were hoping for, but when my parents separated, it was pretty bad. My father had cheated on my mom and gave her a gift that keeps on giving. Years later, my mom exacted her revenge by returning the affair. My father did not like this, so he beat the crap out of her. My mom took me and left, packing her belongings and some things in the car, and driving to the edge of town where we abandoned the car in an abandoned gas station's parking lot, and were driven out of state by my grandfather, who came to rescue us. My mom was my father's office manager for his private practice clinic. In the trunk of the car were 6+ months of insurance claims that needed to be submitted. This was in '89, when everything was done by paper. By the time my father realized what happened with the payments no longer coming in, it was too late. He had to close his private practice, file for bankruptcy, sell his house on the side of a mountain with a gorgeous view, and sell all of his possessions just to stay afloat. He later filed bankruptcy again because the financial damage was that devastating. I remember hearing him screaming at her over the phone one time, "Where's the money?" "Duck you, that's where." Story 44. My friend knows a guy that flew his private jet from London to France for lunch. When he finished lunch, his jet was having some maintenance issues. Rather than waiting the 2-3 hours for them to figure it out, he approached a less rich private jet owner and offered them a big enough check for it to be worth their inconvenience to sell him their jet on the spot. Story 45. Kerry Packer was an Australian billionaire with a few good stories. Probably the most famous that I always assumed was just a story, but not based in fact. Mr. Packer was having a disagreement with a loud-mouthed Texan at a poker table. Packer fobbed him off when he requested to join the table, and he came back with something to the effect of, "I'm a high roller too, I'm worth over $100 million, to which Packer replied, "If you really feel like gambling, I'll flip you for it." After he died, someone high up in the resort group confirmed it had actually happened. He had a heart attack and gave every AMBO worker, anyone that had anything to do with his survival, $1 million each. He paid off a waitress's mortgage after he accidentally bumped into her and knocked her tray of drinks over. There'd be a bunch more too. Story 46. I'm a structural engineer. I was working on a rich guy's house and he asked me for ideas to make his main staircase stand out a little more. But at that point, the project had gone on way too long and basically just needed to end. So I pulled out a few pictures of this ridiculous feature staircase I designed for a hotel and told him it would probably cost $100K, which is like double, if not triple, but I was trying to scare him off, and probably wasn't worth it. But that he could get the same look cladding the regular one we'd already designed for him. The mofo thought about it for 10 seconds and said, "I love it. Do it." I thought I was highballing him so hard that he'd give up and move on. After I told the architect, he laughed at me and told me like 5 other things in the house that were going to be unnecessarily customized just to stand out. Custom lighting fixtures, one-off in-between sizes and colors. This guy apparently was willing to spend $1 million just to have random stuff exactly the way he wanted it. Story 47. I work at an optometrist clinic, and this guy comes in every 2 years with his bags of 30 pairs of glasses to change the lenses with new prescription in them. He spends around $30K only for glasses. Story 48. Jeff Bezos spending $42 million to dig a ducking hole in a mountain to build a big-ass clock that will last 10,000 years. The biggest one probably being the $44 billion Elon spent on Twitter just so he could post memes. Story 49. There was this teen girl on a hiking trip with us. In the middle of the mountains, she said she didn't want to walk anymore. 15 minutes later, she got picked up by her private helicopter. Story 50. Both very cool guys. This is a car guy story. At a car show, and a guy brought his $1.7 million full carbon fiber race car. It was a 2023 and had to be trailered. Thing was awesome. I can't even imagine driving it on a track. I'm a seasoned driver, but I certainly couldn't handle that. He had brought a couple other cars as well. Super nice guy, his wife was fun to talk to and chatted with his mother-in-law for a bit as well. He had done well for himself. Parked next to that was a '77 Porsche RSR Lite. Just a regular-looking old Porsche. The mid-30-year-old that had driven to the show was driving it just to make sure it was mechanically sound. His friend, the owner of the Porsche, wanted him making sure it was ready for the owner's upcoming lap of the P&W. He didn't have time to. That Porsche is one of 200 and something like one of 30 in that color in the world. Also worth almost 1.7 million. Having your friend drive your car worth that much just so it gets driven because you don't have the time is definitely duck you money. It's definitely not the owner's only high-dollar car. He probably has more cars than I have lug nuts on my 4 vehicles. The race car, similar to the Porsche. Story 51. Poppy's Chicken wanted to suddenly start charging 25 cents for sauce. They even acted like you were trying to steal from them asking for it in the second window. I literally cannot order just sauces in the app. So I gave them $5 and told them give me 20 honey mustards. Duck you money. Story 52. I don't know if this counts, but I've seen people in really nice cars or with special plates who park on purpose in prohibited spots. Not handicapped spots for long periods of time, preferring to just get the ticket and to struggle to find a spot or go to the next nearest parking lot. I think could be an example of duck you money, to rather spend $120 for a fine than suffering the burden of walking from their cars. Story 53. I read an article about a Saudi princess who went on a $20 million shopping spree in Geneva. She needed 4 trucks to deliver everything to her home. She never opened or used the items. Story 54. George Harrison and the most expensive cinema ticket he ever bought originally, the Monty Python film, Life of Brian, was backed by Emmy Films, a British film studio. But shortly before production was set to begin, Emmy pulled out of the project. The head of Emmy at the time, Bernard Delfont, was concerned about the controversial religious themes of the film, which could have been perceived by the public as blasphemous. This left the project without financing, which nearly led to the film being canceled. At this point, George Harrison, the former guitarist of the Beatles, stepped in. Harrison was a big fan of Monty Python and was determined to save the film. He founded his own production company, Handmade Films, and provided £3 million, approximately $5 million at the time, to finance the film. Harrison even went so far as to mortgage his own house to raise the necessary funds. He later jokingly explained that he made the film because he really wanted to see it, leading him to describe the film as the most expensive cinema ticket he ever bought. Story 55. This is from my own personal experience. My wife is a doctor and was in a successful practice with another doctor for 25 years. For that entire time, my wife was on top of the financials in the business, making sure insurance reimbursements were correct, negotiating insurance contracts, getting deals on vaccines, and dealing with the employees. Her partner knew nothing about that stuff and just let her handle it all. A few years ago, he brought his wife in to work in the office over my wife's objections. The wife would do shady crap like take patients off my wife's schedule and put them on her husband's schedule, which impacted my wife's income. After COVID, my wife was just done with it all, and I told her we had duck you money if she wanted to leave. She told her partner she was leaving at the end of the year, gave him a month's notice, and said she would help him with the insurance reimbursements and everything until he got the hang of it. He told her, no, not to come back at all, that he would handle it and didn't need her help. 7 months later, the practice closed down because he was incompetent. He turned a practice that made 7 figures a year into dust in just a few months. I love that story. Asshole. Story 56. Lucky enough to get into a super premium high roller room at a casino in Nevada, not in Las Vegas. Watched a dude play blackjack with 25K chips do this. 100K win. Lets it ride 200K win. Lets it ride 400K win. Lets it ride 800K on the table. Loses, stands up, tosses the dealer a $1,000 chip and walks away like it was nothing. Pretty amazing. Either the dude has true duck you money or is just an idiot. Story 57. My boss is ultra wealthy. Dude lives up the hill from Dr. Dre and was neighbors with Tom Brady, among other people. One of his neighbors is T-Pain. Story was shared that T-Pain moved into the house and didn't like the facade, so he was paying to have it removed and changed to something else. Common for mansions where you want to change the appearance without replacing the whole thing. Anyway, the workers spend quite some time removing the facade when T-Pain decides that no, he did actually kind of like it. So he paid them to rebuild it exactly as it had been. There were other stories, like my boss having a Super Bowl party and them having to bring the animals inside, like the camel, alligator, etc. And apparently, this ruined his expensive wood floors, and he didn't even blink at having to spend $30K to replace them. There's definitely a different reality when you have that sort of money, but I still really like my boss. Extremely nice, driven, and the single most charismatic person I've ever met. It's easy to see how he became wealthy. Story 58. Eating in restaurants and seeing bills of $20K if I pay $300 for some fancy dinner. It's a lot for me and I do this only on special occasions. But the food in the restaurant is $150 per person, so having a bill of $20K is from purely drinking expensive wines. Some people have too much money. Story 59. I once worked for a company that was started by a husband and wife. The wife liked to write essays about her political opinions and include them in the company's marketing. One day, she wrote an entire essay about how she hates electric cars and how they're a terrible idea for America. The next day, her husband bought a Tesla and proudly parks it on company property. The two of them do not get along very well, needless to say. Story 60 was standing in line at the post office, and an elderly woman was asking everyone in line if she could pass through because she only needed one lottery ticket. Not asking very politely, that is, making comments about people not moving fast enough, being disrespectful to the elderly, that kind of stuff. Cue in first man in line. He heard her coming and was kind of done with her attitude. He asked the cashier how many lottery tickets there still were left for the lottery of that week. It were about 100 tickets. He bought them all. Story 61. My uncle made a bunch of money in investment banking. Seemingly out of the blue, he decided to buy a chain of shops he was fired from for catching his manager having an affair with another employee. He bought the shop with a partner. The shop owner and the managers only ever saw the other partner. He said he made it a point of the deal to keep the personnel in place after the sale. First day after taking ownership, he walks in and fires the manager that fired him. Then gave everyone else raises and made sure the ex-employee heard about it. Story 62. I knew a guy who used to like hill walking and rambling as it was a relaxing break from his high-pressure job, like 300,000 pounds a year, 5 years ago sort of job. Anyway, there was one particular farm he used to go through near his house. In England, you can walk on any legal footpath or bridleway without needing landowner consent, where one of the sheep there would always charge him down and try to knock him over. So he bought the farmer out and had the sheep put down. That's definitely duck you money. Ooh. Story 63. Trey Packer and Matt Stone getting their contract for a crap ton of specials and episodes for many years to come. They said they got to do pretty much what they want and now make duck you money. Story 64. He wanted to surprise his mother for her birthday. So he flew from Spain to Hawaii to surprise her at the hotel she was staying at for her birthday. Took her out to lunch, then flew back to Spain. He apparently decided he really liked Madrid so much about 15 years ago that he never really left when he visited for spring break. He seems to have enough in his trust fund that he doesn't ever have to worry about money. It's just there for him to spend on endless parties in Spain and flying to parties across Europe and Asia. He seemed genuinely perplexed that I didn't just buy my building when I complained about the cost of rent. Like everyone has $350K just sitting around to casually spend. Story 65. I work for a railroad, and several times I've seen the railroad offer millions to people with junk sheds because it was in the way of recovery operations. Story 66. Steve Jobs was probably the biggest asshole who people think was a genius. Good guy and worship. Buy a new car every few months or whatever, so he didn't have to get a license plate. Bought his way into the organ donor list, killing someone innocent who deserved it 1,000,000 times more, when he was finally dying after ignoring all medical advice because he knew better. Didn't donate a cent, didn't allow others to, treated his family and employees like crap, cheated Wozniak out of billions, started the culture of treating users like crap, making repairs impossible, milking as much money as he could, stole every single idea he had, never gave CR a true piece of crap. Story 67. My former employer's CEO spent around USD $300K on each season's wardrobe, bought a current year at the time Lamborghini Urus, fully loaded cash, bought numerous USD $5, 15 million houses for meetings and guests who need to stay in town. Bought his teenage son a USD $, 15 million house. Bought his own house for 250% of its market worth. It was valued at USD $24 million, but wasn't on the market. So he offered the owner USD $60 million cash for it. Replaced all of his 105 4K TVS with 105 8K TVS as soon as those hit the market. Bought a condo in Qatar so he'd have somewhere to stay for the 2022 FIFA World Cup. Chartered private jets to fly everywhere. Dude was as rich enough to be accountable to basically no one. Story 68. He used to work for a financial services company. CEO was a very rich guy, not a household name, but consistently made the Forbes top 10 for the wealthiest people in the state. He was a billionaire. Anyway, we were moving office spaces, and his assistants were packing up his office and files. One day, the assistant brought over a folder with paperwork for a boat. She asked him if he still owned this boat, or if she could throw out the doe ejaculate or cum, seminence. He did not know if he still owned the boat. He could not remember for the life of him and said he would have to reach out to somebody to confirm. How much money do you have to have? How many boats have you ejaculate or cum? Simulated to forget something like this. Story 69. Worked for a BMW dealership. Customer came in during a sales event, saw a fully loaded X5M in the showroom, had a look at it, and told a salesman, "I don't have one that's red with red leather interior. I'll take it." He bought it outright and put it on the trailer he brought with him to take it home. Didn't even test drive it. It was almost $200K CAD, so about $140K USD. Story 70. Kerry Packer. He frequented a particular casino often. One night after a good run, he wanted to tip the dealer. She declined, as per casino policy. So he asked to see her supervisor, who affirmed that it was against company policy for employees to accept tips from clientele. He demanded that they fire her or he'd never come back. They obliged. He then said, "Well, now she's not an employee, I can tip her," and gave her a ridiculous sum of money. The supervisor obliged. Kerry then said, "Hire her back again or I'll never come back to your casino." She got her job back and pocketed the tip. Story 71. At the train station, there's this toy train in a glass montre. My 4-year-old loves it. It costs 2 Danish kroners to make it run for like 30 seconds. It's located inside Joe and the Juice, but it's rare you walk around with change in Denmark. So often kids can't see the train run. One day on my way home from work, this small guy was sobbing so quietly on the lap of his mother since it couldn't run. I turned 180, walked to the bank, and got 252 kroner coins. I gave the mother 5, and the dude at the counter, the rest with instructions on giving free trips whenever kids came in. It's not a crazy spending spree, but I just got so pissed off all the missed moments kids could have. Story 72. A guy I know was under investigation for fraud, and as a result, they seized all of his cars. Among his cars were quite a few super expensive cars, except a simple compact so he could still get around. He was later found not guilty, BTW. Shortly after they seized his car, it was great weather and he wanted to cruise around. So he casually goes to a high-end dealership and leaves with a brand new Lamborghini they had in the showroom. The guy bought a $300K car, like a normal person buys a cup of coffee. Story 73. I had a teacher in high school who taught carpentry in a media photography class. He was genuinely the best teacher I ever had. He was kind, caring, funny, and was only a teacher because he enjoyed it. It was well known throughout the school that he was loaded. He owned a bunch of restaurants, several big medical officer buildings, and, as he put it, dabbled in stocks. I don't know how much money he really had, but he was definitely a little petty with it. His neighbor's dog was constantly crafting in his yard, and after months of nothing being done about it, he went to the guy's bank and bought out his mortgage. The neighbor had to start making his mortgage payment to my teacher, or at least one of his businesses. And surprise, surprise, no more dog crap. Story 74. I was once acquainted with a guy who got the HOA to make a specific list of exotic animals that were banned from the neighborhood. He then bought a liger and a tigon, as well as a few other less dangerous animals because they weren't on the most likely very sarcastic list. I'm guess if the association had taken him to court, they would have won, but it would have been very expensive. Story 75. My uncle brings a semi-full of food, water, equipment, including toilets, outdoor shower, water heater, enough generators and batteries for a village, and toys when going hunting for a week. He hires a crew of 3, 1 chef to cook for him, 1 to keep base camp clean, and 1 to maintain vehicles and toys they bring. My dad goes with a regular tent, some sandwiches, and his pickup. Says he would rather drive into town if he needs something. I personally think my uncle goes way overboard. Story 76. My very minor version of this was paying off some small outstanding debts and providing a late 2000s Toyota car to a kid we loved in a crafty home life situation for like $5K in tires, car insurance, cell phone payoff, and a few other very minor things. We have an amazing oldest daughter and are in the process of adopting her sister too. I'm no Mr. Moneybags over here, but paying her toxic mom $800 to cover the remaining balance on the cell phone plus unpaid monthly cell bills made me feel like a rich man. Story 77, on a smaller scale to many other stories, but my friend's millionaire friend took him and a group of friends to stay in a very expensive London hotel. He ordered a round of expensive shots for everyone, and a little later my friend asked the waiter for another shot. Does sir know how much these shots cost? About £100 each. Millionaire was in earshot and called the waiter over. Sir does know how much these shots cost. Bring over a new bottle and leave it here. Story 78. An old boss wanted to fire someone for forging signatures on a safety dock. Said he can't just fire someone, there's a process. His response was, duck them, let them sue me. I've got more money than they have. Story 79. There's a really wealthy couple around where I live that built a brand new beautiful house on the ocean. There was an old building across the street that housed an old neighborhood bar. Well, shortly after they moved in, the old man that owned the bar decided to retire and put the building up for sale. This was literally the only commercial zone property in the whole neighborhood. They immediately bought it to prevent someone else from buying it and putting in a CVEs or a bank or something. They completely renovated the bar and used it as a private club for their friends and family. Story 80. I went to a birthday party at a play center. As part of the package, the kids got a little lunchbox with some chocolate, chips, and the choice of either a jam, cheese, or ham sandwich. The parents couldn't be bothered asking ahead of time which sandwiches the kids would want, so they bought each kid 3 lunchboxes, 1 of each, so they could just grab the one they wanted. Story 81. Had this conversation with a friend that does 6 times better than I do. My duck, you money is being able to go to Costco and saying, get whatever you want to the family. His duck, you money, is a weekend trip to Paris to bring his wife shopping. We both have duck you money. It's just different levels. We both have pretty decent tequila collections, so we are equals. Story 82. I went to a Midwestern wedding reception around 20078 that served alcohol. There was a beer that the couple picked, and you could get one for free. Any more, plus all other drinks, were cash bar. The marrying couple were in their early 20s and were starting out in life with not much money. One of the groom's cousins, a senior-level employee from Microsoft fresh in from Seattle, said duck that and announced he would pay for all drinks so everyone could enjoy themselves. He was shocked at how little the bill turned out to be relative to the size of the gathering, something like $3K for 250 people. Story 83. Worked with an older guy who had lots of different income streams. He was probably in his early 50s. New boss came in, early 30s, hothead. Couple of weeks later, old guy went to company owner. Small business, maybe 12, 15 employees depending on time of year. Told him to rein the new guy in. Old guy knew a lot about the operations and logistics of the business. Owner said he'd talk to the boss. Boss got crafty and blew up. Old guy told him to go duck himself, walked out, never see him again. At work, we used to water ski together. Story 84. My father-in-law was a machinist and mechanic and was very proficient in fixing an engine fault in the old Lamborghini Muiras. He had a client bring the engine to his rickety old workshop here in the UK in the back of a 25 million pound Ferrari. Not quite sure what the client was thinking, but he did cover the back seats with a towel. Story 85. I can't find info on it now, but I remember hearing a story about Bam Margera walking into a car dealership and being ignored. When he was finally helped, he bought the car using a backpack full of cash. Story 86. My dad's former golf buddy made insane finance money. He was a total He loved racing cars at a local track. Some dude cut him off during a race, so he deliberately crashed and totaled both their cars to prevent the other guy from coming in one place before him in fifth place. It wasn't even to win, he just wanted to duck the other guy over. Bet you're still a dickhead, Scott. Story 87. Ex-professional bodyguard here. I've worked for several well-known billionaires, some watch literally every cent, and others throw money around like it's blank paper. I did have one client, foreigner, offer to pay me $5K to give beat up this girl's boyfriend at a club one night. He got furious with me when I refused. It then went downhill for him the rest of the night. Screamed at me in a different language the entire drive back to his place. Prick. Story 88. Prolific Indian actor Anil Kapoor loved 24 so much that he bought the rights to remake it, bankrolled the very high-budget production, and cast himself as Jack Bauer, and it rules. Story 89. Used to work as a cook at an expensive boutique hotel. A party of maybe 50, 100 people from a local cannabis startup asked to rent out our banquet hall for a party and asked if they could smoke in there. Floor manager said not in the banquet hall, but they could give us $25,000 and they could rent out the top 2 floors, which were suites, and do whatever they want in them, which they did. Story 90. My personal favorite, but not that extravagant. My wife runs an art in 2 units of a storefront building with 7 units. She had some foundation issues and the landlords refused to fix them. So we bought the whole building. It wasn't for sale. We just made an offer and told them that otherwise we'd leave when the lease was up. Most expensive middle finger I've ever given anyone. Worth it though. Story 91. I mean, this is like very low scale duck you money. In my town of around 3K people, if not less, where I grew up, there was a singular pizzeria. Dude who owned it was great, constantly giving free stuff to kids who ordered and threw in extras. Another pizza place opened, and within a couple days, he had bought the place just to close it immediately. Story 92. Mega yacht Formosa, anchored in Hawaii, tore up hundreds of coral colonies with its anchor and chain. Over 11,000 square feet of reef destroyed, along with hundreds of colonies, and the fine was 100,000 USD chump change to the billionaires. Rumors, but owners blew it off as an incredible value to anchor out and sleep at a coral reef, which they otherwise could not do. Story 93. George Lucas was trying to set up, I think, Skywalker Ranch, and the neighbors complained and went to the town. His response was, if they didn't let him build Skywalker Ranch, he was going to build low-income housing out of spite and sink the property values of all those rich assholes. In the end, he won. Nobody likes the poor. Story 94. A former client of ours. We ran a food pantry. He was a regular. He inherited some wild amount of money instead of his crappy relatives, and he bought a yacht, and last I heard it lived in it and travels. Story 95. I knew a guy who bought a boat, and he thought the marina near his beach house charged too much to keep it there. So he bought the marina. And it wasn't just some crappy marina. It was a huge, very nice marina in Southwest FL.